What if I told you that the people who have hurt you the most may have been showing you parts of yourself you've never been willing to see? Not because they were sent by the universe. Not because destiny wanted you to suffer. But because your own unconscious mind kept recognizing something painfully familiar. Long before your conscious mind ever called it love. Think about the last 3 people who changed your life. Maybe one was a romantic partner. Maybe one was a close friend. Maybe one was someone you couldn't stand being around. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. Why did 3 completely different people make you feel exactly the same? Why does rejection always sound familiar? Why does betrayal always wear a different face, yet somehow tell the exact same story? Most people believe they're choosing different people. Psychology suggests something much stranger. It suggests that until certain unconscious patterns become visible, we don't actually choose. We repeat. Every relationship begins with hope. Every friendship begins with curiosity. Every new connection feels different. Until suddenly it doesn't. At first, everything appears new. New conversations. New habits. New dreams. New promises. But then, almost without warning, the same arguments appear. The same disappointments. The same emotional distance. The same fear. The same ending. Different face. Same story. Eventually you begin asking yourself the question millions of people quietly carry inside them. Why does this always happen to me? Maybe you've blamed bad luck. Maybe you've blamed dating apps. Maybe you've blamed your childhood. Maybe you've blamed yourself. But what if none of those explanations go deep enough? What if the person you're attracted to has less to do with them, and far more to do with something inside you that's been searching for recognition your entire life? Carl Jung believed exactly that. He proposed one of the most unsettling ideas in modern psychology. He said we don't simply fall in love with another person. We fall in love with parts of ourselves we've never fully met. And the parts we reject within ourselves don't disappear. They become projections. Invisible psychological films. Placed over the faces of everyone we meet. Imagine walking through life wearing glasses you've forgotten you're wearing. Every person appears different. Yet the lenses never change. Sooner or later, every relationship begins reflecting the same hidden image. Not because people are identical. Because the observer never changed. If you watched our previous video, you'll remember something called the observer effect. In quantum physics, observation changes the behavior of what is being observed. We also explored something equally fascinating inside psychology. Attention changes mental patterns. What remains unconscious repeats itself automatically. What becomes conscious begins to transform. Today, we're taking that idea one step further. Not into physics. Into relationships. Because projection may be the closest thing the human mind has to living inside its own invisible reality. Let me show you something. Have you ever met someone and instantly trusted them without knowing why? Or felt uncomfortable around someone within seconds, before they had done anything wrong? Your brain will tell you, I'm just good at reading people. Sometimes that's true. But sometimes, you're not reading them at all. You're reading yourself. Only, you don't recognize the handwriting. This is projection. And Jung believed projection is one of the strongest forces shaping every relationship you'll ever have. Love. Friendship. Family. Even hatred. Projection doesn't ask whether something is true. Projection asks only one question. What feels familiar? Because familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. Even when familiarity hurts us. especially when it hurts us. This explains one of the strangest paradoxes in human relationships. People often leave painful relationships, only to recreate them with someone completely different. Different city, different career, different personality, different appearance. Yet somehow, the emotional experience becomes almost identical. It's as if life keeps handing them the same script, with different actors. Most people believe they're unlucky. Jung believed something else. He believed the unconscious always tries to become conscious. Until it succeeds. It repeats the lesson. Not as punishment. Not as fate. As invitation. Invitation to finally see what has been silently choosing for you all along. Here's where today's journey becomes uncomfortable. Because by the end of this video, you may discover that the person you've blamed for years was never the whole story. That doesn't mean people haven't hurt you. They have. Some people manipulate. Some betray. Some lie. Some abuse trust. Nothing in this video excuses harmful behavior. But psychology asks a different question. Not, why did they do that? Instead, why does this exact emotional pattern keep returning? That's where your freedom begins. Because you cannot control who enters your life. But you can begin understanding why certain people feel irresistible, while others barely register your attention. And once you understand that, your relationships stop feeling random. They begin revealing a map. A map leading somewhere most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Their own shadow. In this video, we'll uncover why you're magnetically drawn towards certain personalities. Why the people who irritate you often reveal more about you than about themselves. And how one simple psychological exercise can begin breaking patterns that may have followed you for decades. Because the greatest relationship you'll ever repair isn't the one you lost. It's the one between you and the parts of yourself you've spent your entire life looking away from. Imagine walking into a room filled with 100 strangers. Objectively, every one of them has lived a completely different life. Different childhood. Different fears. Different dreams. Different scars. Yet somehow, within minutes, one person captures your attention. Not because they're objectively perfect. Not because they're the most attractive person in the room. Something else happens. Something beneath awareness quietly whispers. I know this person. But here's the unsettling part. You probably don't. Your unconscious simply recognizes a familiar emotional pattern. Long before love comes recognition. And recognition isn't always healthy. Carl Jung believed that human beings rarely see other people exactly as they are. Instead, we see them through invisible psychological filters built during childhood. He called this projection. Projection isn't lying to yourself. It's something much more convincing. It's mistaking your inner world for objective reality. Imagine shining a movie projector onto a blank white wall. The wall itself hasn't changed. But suddenly, it appears to contain an entire story. Heroes. Villains. Romance. Fear. None of it exists inside the wall. The story comes from the projector. Jung believed relationships work remarkably similarly. When you meet someone, your unconscious immediately begins filling in the blanks. It projects memories, expectations, old emotional wounds, unfinished stories onto someone you've barely met. The frightening part? It feels completely real. Because your brain isn't trying to deceive you. It's trying to predict the future. Using the past. Modern neuroscience actually supports parts of this idea. Our brains constantly rely on previous experiences to interpret new situations. Psychologists sometimes describe perception as a process of prediction. The brain doesn't wait for every piece of information. It builds expectations first, then searches for evidence that confirms them. This is one reason first impressions can feel so powerful. They often say more about our internal models than about the person standing in front of us. Now imagine those internal models were created when you were 6 years old, or 8, or 12. Imagine growing up believing love had to be earned. That affection disappeared whenever you made mistakes. That silence meant rejection. That conflict meant abandonment. Years later, you meet someone emotionally unavailable. Instead of feeling danger, your nervous system feels familiarity. And familiarity often disguises itself as chemistry. This is why some relationships feel like destiny, even when they're quietly repeating an old wound. People often say, "I don't know why I fell for them." Psychology offers a disturbing possibility. Maybe your conscious mind didn't. Maybe your unconscious did. Let's make this real. Picture a woman who spent her childhood trying desperately to earn her father's approval. Nothing she accomplished ever seemed enough. Straight A's. Perfect behavior. Constant achievement. Yet love always felt conditional. Years later, she falls deeply in love with emotionally distant partners. Every relationship becomes another attempt to finally earn the affection she never received. It isn't that she enjoys suffering. Far from it. She's trying to finish a story that never reached its ending. Now imagine a man raised by unpredictable parents. Some days they were warm. Other days, cold. Explosive. Impossible to understand. His nervous system learned something dangerous. Love equals uncertainty. As an adult, calm relationships feel strangely empty. Stable partners seem boring. Predictable affection feels suspicious. Instead, he feels intensely alive around emotionally unpredictable people. He calls it passion. His nervous system calls it familiar. This happens far more often than most people realize. The unconscious doesn't necessarily seek happiness. It seeks completion. And if it cannot complete an old story, it repeats it. Again. And again. Until someone finally becomes aware enough to stop participating automatically. Jung once wrote something extraordinary. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Read that slowly. Because those words may explain decades of your relationships. Most people say, "I always meet narcissists." Or, "I always attract emotionally unavailable people." Or, "I always end up being betrayed." Sometimes, those observations are completely accurate. But psychology asks another question. Why do these particular people continue entering your emotional world, while others never become important enough to hurt you? Because attraction isn't random. Attention isn't random. Emotional intensity isn't random. They follow invisible pathways, laid down years before your first romantic relationship ever began. Now let's explore the opposite side of projection. Hatred. Have you ever met someone who irritated you immediately? Not because they insulted you. Not because they harmed you. Simply because of who they seemed to be. Maybe they were confident. Too loud. Too successful. Too emotional. Too quiet. Too ambitious. Too sensitive. Too free. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. Why does that particular trait bother you more than everyone else in the room? Jung believed the answer often hides inside the shadow. Perhaps their confidence reminds you of confidence you were never allowed to express. Perhaps their vulnerability exposes emotions you spent decades suppressing. Perhaps their ambition reflects dreams you quietly abandoned years ago. Projection works both ways. We project our wounds onto the people we love. And we project our rejected qualities onto the people we dislike. The result is astonishing. Without realizing it, we spend our lives surrounded not only by other people, but by reflections of ourselves. This doesn't mean every attraction is projection. Nor does it mean every conflict reveals hidden trauma. Human relationships are wonderfully complex. People genuinely differ in values, compatibility, communication, and personality. But projection explains something deeper. Why certain people evoke emotional reactions far beyond what the situation seems to justify. Why someone you've known for 2 weeks can affect you more deeply than someone you've known for 20 years. Because they didn't just enter your life. They entered an unfinished story. And somewhere inside your unconscious, a younger version of you quietly whispered, maybe this time. Maybe this time. They'll stay. Maybe this time. They'll choose me. Maybe this time. I'll finally be enough. But unless the story itself changes, the ending rarely does. Because projection doesn't change the script. It simply finds new actors. Next. What if the people you fall in love with aren't actually the people you're searching for? What if you're searching for the missing parts of yourself? That's where Jung's most misunderstood idea begins. And that's exactly where we're going next. There is an idea Carl Jung introduced late in his career. One that many psychologists still consider one of his most profound observations. He believed that we don't simply search for love. We search for wholeness. And because we rarely recognize the missing parts of ourselves, we unconsciously look for them inside someone else. Think about that for a moment. Perhaps the person who fascinated you wasn't extraordinary. Perhaps they simply carried qualities your unconscious had buried decades ago. Confidence, freedom, creativity, strength, tenderness, joy. The very qualities you admired may have been the qualities you abandoned long ago. Jung called this another form of projection. Not projecting pain, but projecting potential. Sometimes the people who attract us most aren't showing us who they are. They're showing us who we forgot we could become. Imagine a woman who spent her childhood trying to be perfect, responsible, quiet, predictable. She became the person everyone depended on. The one who never caused problems. The one who always did the right thing. Years later, she becomes deeply attracted to someone spontaneous, adventurous, wild, completely unpredictable. She believes, I'm attracted because they're exciting. Perhaps. But Jung would ask another question. What part of yourself are they living that you've never allowed yourself to live? Maybe she isn't falling in love with chaos. Maybe she's falling in love with her own forgotten freedom. Now imagine another person. He grew up believing emotions were weakness. Whenever he cried, someone told him to be strong. Whenever he felt afraid, he learned to hide it. Eventually, he stopped feeling altogether. At least, that's what he believed. Then one day, he meets someone deeply emotional. Someone who cries openly, laughs loudly, feels everything. He becomes fascinated. He tells himself, I've never met anyone like this. Maybe that's true. Or maybe he has. Every day. Inside himself. Only. He buried that person years ago. The attraction isn't mysterious. It's recognition. Not of another soul. But of a forgotten piece of his own. This explains something that confuses millions of people. Why does the intensity disappear once the relationship becomes stable? Because projection begins to fade. In the beginning, you don't see the other person clearly. You see possibility, fantasy, hope. Your unconscious fills in missing pieces, using its own unfinished story. Psychologists call this idealization. Jung saw something deeper. He believed we temporarily give another human being the responsibility of carrying parts of ourselves we've never integrated. It's an impossible task. Eventually, reality arrives. The projection weakens. You begin seeing the real person. Not the symbolic one. Not the savior. Not the missing half. Just another imperfect human being. And for many relationships, that's the moment everything changes. People often say, they changed. Sometimes they did. But sometimes, the projection ended. This doesn't happen only in romantic relationships. It happens everywhere. Think about mentors, celebrities, influencers, spiritual teachers. Sometimes we admire them. Not because they possess something impossible, but because they express something we've never given ourselves permission to express. Confidence, purpose, creativity, leadership, compassion. The admiration feels external. Its origin is internal. Now let's explore the darker side. The people who trigger you. Perhaps there's someone at work. Everything they do annoys you. The way they speak. The way they laugh. The confidence they carry. You tell yourself, they're arrogant. Maybe they are. But Jung invites a different question. What if their confidence reminds you of confidence you've never allowed yourself to feel? Or perhaps someone else's vulnerability irritates you. They ask for help. They express sadness. They admit weakness. You silently judge them. They're too emotional. Are they? Or were you simply taught that emotion was dangerous? The shadow rarely appears wearing its own face. It borrows someone else's. This is why projection is so convincing. It feels objective. It feels obvious. It feels like you're describing another person. Meanwhile, you're describing invisible parts of yourself. Not entirely. Not always. But often enough to change your entire understanding of relationships. Modern psychology offers an interesting parallel. Researchers studying attachment theory discovered that early emotional experiences shape expectations about future relationships. Children don't simply learn who their parents are. They learn what love feels like, what conflict means, whether closeness feels safe, whether distance feels familiar. Those expectations become internal models. Invisible maps. Without realizing it, we compare every new relationship against maps created decades earlier. Jung called them complexes. Attachment theory calls them internal working models. Different language. Remarkably similar observation. The past quietly influences the present. Until someone becomes aware of it. Here's something extraordinary. The unconscious doesn't care whether a pattern hurts. It cares whether it's familiar. This explains why people sometimes leave toxic relationships, only to recreate them months later. Different name. Different face. Same emotional rhythm. It's like changing the actors, without changing the screenplay. Until the writer changes, the story repeats. So here's the question. If you aren't actually searching for another person, what are you searching for? Jung believed. You're searching for yourself. Not your personality. Not your job. Not your identity. Your wholeness. Every attraction. Every obsession. Every irrational dislike. Point somewhere deeper. Not toward another human being. Toward unfinished work inside your own psyche. This realization changes everything. Because suddenly, relationships stop being random events. They become mirrors. Not perfect mirrors. Not always accurate. But mirrors nonetheless. Showing you pieces you've forgotten. Pieces you've rejected. Pieces still waiting to come home. If that's true, then perhaps the greatest purpose of every relationship was never to complete you. Perhaps it was simply to introduce you to yourself. Coming next. Now that you understand why projection happens, one question remains. How do you stop repeating the same relationship over and over again? I'll show you Jung's practical path toward integration, a powerful self-observation exercise, and the one question that can completely change how you choose the next person who enters your life. There comes a moment in every person's life when they stop asking, "Why does this always happen to me?" and begin asking a far more powerful question. Why does this keep feeling familiar? That single shift changes everything. Because for the first time, you stop investigating other people and begin investigating the observer. The one who has been making invisible choices long before your conscious mind ever believed it was choosing. This is where the cycle begins to break. One of Jung's most famous statements is often misunderstood. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say, "Destroy the darkness." He didn't say, "Eliminate your shadow." He didn't say, "Become a perfect person." He said, "Become conscious." Because awareness changes the relationship between you and the pattern. Think about learning to drive. At first, every movement demands conscious attention. Every mirror. Every pedal. Every turn. Eventually, those actions become automatic. Relationships work the same way. Only, many of our emotional reactions became automatic long before we were old enough to question them. Until awareness returns, the unconscious continues driving. Let's try something together. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Right now. Think of the last person who deeply hurt you. Hold their face in your mind. Now ask yourself, without defending them, without blaming yourself, just with complete honesty, what emotion did they awaken that already existed before they arrived? Not what they caused. What they revealed. Did they awaken abandonment? Not enoughness? Fear of rejection? Fear of being controlled? Fear of disappearing? Most people answer, they made me feel. But perhaps they activated something that had been waiting quietly for years. A wound isn't created every time it's touched. Sometimes it's simply discovered. Now comes the second question. And this one is harder. Where did you first learn that feeling? Not with that partner. Not with your ex. Not with your boss. Earlier. Much earlier. Perhaps someone only praised you when you performed perfectly. Perhaps someone withdrew love whenever you disappointed them. Perhaps your emotions were ignored. Perhaps your needs felt inconvenient. You don't need to remember every detail. The nervous system remembers, even when the mind doesn't. This is why healing rarely begins with another relationship. It begins with another conversation. The conversation between you and the younger version of yourself, who first believed. This is what love feels like. Here's the exercise I promised. It isn't complicated. But if you practice it honestly, it may change every relationship you have from this day forward. Step 1. Write down the names of the 3 people who have affected you most emotionally. They can be former partners, friends, parents, anyone. Now, next to each name, write the emotion they made you feel most often. Rejected, invisible, controlled, unsafe, unworthy, abandoned. Write only one word. You'll probably notice something remarkable. Different people, same emotion. Step 2. Ask yourself, what belief about myself would create this emotional experience repeatedly? Not, they always leave. Instead, I believe people eventually leave. Not, no one listens. Instead, I believe my voice doesn't matter. The difference is enormous. One blames reality. The other reveals programming. And programming can be rewritten. Step 3. Now imagine meeting someone completely new tomorrow. Someone healthy, emotionally available, kind, patient. Would you immediately trust them? Or would part of you feel uncomfortable? Many people discover something shocking here. Safety can initially feel unfamiliar. Chaos can feel like chemistry. Silence can feel like rejection. Kindness can feel suspicious. Because your nervous system isn't asking, is this healthy? It's asking, have I survived something like this before? And familiarity often wins. This is why growth feels strange. Not because it's wrong. Because it's new. Your unconscious prefers predictable pain over unfamiliar peace. Until awareness intervenes. The beautiful part is that awareness changes the equation. Every time you notice yourself repeating an old emotional pattern, you create a pause. Inside that pause, choice appears. Maybe only for a second. But that's enough. Because patterns don't disappear all at once. They weaken. One conscious moment at a time. One different decision. One healthier boundary. One honest conversation. One relationship. Where you stop abandoning yourself just to avoid being abandoned by someone else. Perhaps this is what Jung meant when he spoke about individuation. Not becoming someone new, but becoming more completely yourself. No longer searching for missing pieces inside strangers. No longer asking another person to heal wounds they never created. No longer confusing familiarity with destiny. Imagine how different your life becomes when attraction is no longer unconscious. When you recognize projection before it becomes obsession. When you notice old wounds before they become new relationships. When you understand that every person entering your life is also revealing something about the person watching them. That person is you. Maybe you were never cursed. Maybe You never had terrible luck. Maybe. You were simply following an emotional map. Drawn by a child. Who was doing the best they could. With what they knew. And perhaps. Today. For the very first time. You've begun drawing a new one. Not by changing everyone around you. But by changing. The one person. Who has been choosing. Without realizing it. The observer. The watcher inside. The one who finally understands. That love doesn't begin when you find the right person. It begins when the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime rejecting are finally welcomed home. So before you leave, I want to ask you one question. Not about your ex. Not about your partner. Not about your parents. About you. What is one emotional pattern you're finally ready to stop calling fate and start calling awareness? Write it in the comments. Because sometimes, the first step toward changing your story is simply having the courage to tell the truth about it. If this video helped you see your relationships differently, subscribe to PsyBeyond, because in our next journey we'll explore one of Jung's deepest ideas. Why the people who trigger you the most may actually be carrying your golden shadow, the greatest version of yourself you've been afraid to become. Until then, keep watching. Especially the parts of yourself you've spent your whole life trying not to see. I'll see you in the next one.